one of the biggest challenges that most people face, but I think Christians, especially is the word I'll use, struggle with. James tells us in his epistle in the New Testament that if a person could tame their tongue, that they'd be able to be perfect in literally every other way. And so, as kind of some guidelines, some of the biggest kind of stumbling blocks, maybe issues that people have when it comes to how they use words. One thing a lot of people bring up is Ephesians 4:29, which says, "Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth." And this is flexed in a lot of different ways, none the least of which is guilting students, junior high, high school, college, into not using foul language, F-bombs, things of that nature. But I think there's a lot more to be gained from it as far as what we see. So, starting off, why does it even matter? Well, I think the most significant way is that what Jesus tells us, he actually repeats from the Old Testament, is that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. That it is what's already inside you that's coming out. And so, by regulating the things that you're saying, you are also exercising control over the way you are seen by the world. And it's notable, like, when you see somebody that doesn't swear, you're like, that's weird, right? They stand out, especially in certain contexts where, like, working in mechanic shops or construction sites where all work is done by F-bombs per minute. So, let's talk about some specific details, though, in this matter of, like, what even is the difference? Cussing, cursing, and swearing. Is there one, or is this just all the same thing? And the answer is no. So, cussing is just cultural. It's culturally designated terms that are impolite or culturally unacceptable. And that's going to change from place to place that you find yourself, as well as the language that you happen to be speaking. There are certain words that are unacceptable in certain contexts, and certain contexts where those words perfectly fine. And so you kind of have to feel your way through it. Cursing is different. Cursing is where you take a moment in a person's life and you use that to literally to pronounce a curse, to bear false witness, because obviously you don't know the future, you don't know what a person's life is really like. Bear false witness about them, about their future or about their present, because of that moment. So saying, you're always going to be a failure, you will never be good at this, you're the worst at these things. That's pronouncing a curse over another person. That is not acceptable. That we are supposed to bear good witness about everyone, that we are supposed to love one another, and that we're supposed to love others even as we love ourselves, love our enemies, even giving generously to them, giving more than they ask for. So this is not an acceptable behavior for a Christian. And also, it's another one of those moments where it really can breathe a stark contrast into a circumstance where it testifies of your character as being distinct from those around you. If everyone around you is gossiping or talking trash about somebody, and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to say those kinds of things about another person made in God's image. Which is what James continues on to say, of that with our mouths, the same tongue, we profess love towards God and praise God, and on the other hand, we run down or derogate other people, cursing them. This should not be. That you don't get bitter water and fresh water out of the same tap. That you don't have poison and clean things in the same space, because the toxicity is going to corrupt the good. The next would be that swearing. What is swearing? Swearing is where you take an oath. In the modern context, when you're thinking about swearing, it's usually adding, let's say, an expletive as an adjective in order to emphasize something, or to in order to indicate or to try and convince someone else of something. Often that in this context, Jesus tells us that we should not take any kinds of oaths. And he was speaking to the Pharisees, who would they would make all kinds of oaths about things. They would swear on the temple or the gold of the temple or things of this nature, and they would actually let people out of their commitments based on what they had sworn towards. Not the temple, it's the gold in the temple treasury that's binding, so I technically don't have to carry that out. Like, really nuanced, minuscule hair splitting. And Jesus said, in response to that kind of a culture, don't take any oaths. That you should just let your yes be a yes, your no be a no. And if someone else doesn't want to believe you on account of that alone, your integrity and your commitment, saying that I will do or I will not do, then oh well. Like, that should be enough. Your integrity, your honesty, your character should be able to sign those checks on their own without additional force brought to you by hell as an adjective. Any other words that would be used for emphasis or as an adjective. Next is gossip, which is it's very clearly designated as a sin in the New and the Old Testament, that we are not to speak about others in a way that would reflect poorly on them. There's especially those things where you're telling secrets that are not yours to tell. You're telling the truth, and we think that we can weasel our way out of it by saying, well, it's true though. But if it's not your truth to tell, then you should not be telling it. It's not yours. That whether that's intentionally to make yourself be inflated, to show yourself as being superior, or to just simply deflate someone else, either way, it's unacceptable behavior. But the way Christians often do this, we'll frame it in the form of a prayer request. Guys, we need to pray for fill in the blank so-and-so because they stumbled with pornography again, or they are cheating on their spouse. Like, we'll gossip about them, but because we've thrown a cloak over it in the form of a prayer request, we think we get a free pass. This is not the case. In fact, spiritualizing in that way makes it even more toxic. God is not a green light. It's not a free pass to engage in sin. In fact, he rebukes the religious leaders for trying to do that very thing, giving religious excuses for the engagement in sinful behavior. Complaining is something that is a woeful, saturated issue in our society. The internet, social media is really, in a lot of ways, nothing more than just an opportunity to complain about things. Whether that's a bad customer experience, or if that's a bad client experience, a bad retail experience on either side, the retailer or the consumer, we love to complain. Someone asks you what things are like at work, you immediately jump into, this is everything that's terrible about my job. But the main thing the Bible has to really say about this is that we are to maintain a heart and a mindset of generosity and of contentment. And if you maintain those two things strongly, intentionally, you will not find any room in your vocabulary or your behavior to be complaining. You're focused more on being grateful that you have a job, that you haven't been laid off, that you haven't been downsized, that you haven't had a shop or a store closed that you were working at, or a restaurant shut down because of current economic conditions. You should be grateful for that. And maybe it's not paying as much as you wish it did. No one ever is paid as much as they wish they were being paid. That's not an excuse for complaining. It's one thing to advocate. It's one thing to say there's an injustice occurring here. The Bible even commands masters that in James and in other places of the New Testament that the lost wages of low-end workers cry out to the Father on their behalf. They don't get away with anything. So he advocates for them in that way. So there is space to say, to negotiate better wages, to ask for more if you need it, and to seek out additional assistances of various kinds, whether that's grocery, welfare, bill pay, stuff of that nature, in order to make sure all of your obligations are met. But that's not the same as complaining. Complaining is when you are vocalizing problems without seeking a solution, or B, rejecting solutions because you want the problem. You just want to talk about the problem. You don't want the thing to be solved, because then what would you have to talk about anymore, right? So complaining is not acceptable for Christians either. And last but not least, maybe one of the most difficult is the concept of insults. We like giving names to people, groups of people especially, of those that are around us, of two categories: those that we love and those that we hate. Whether that's an opposing political party, or if that's someone in a separate social category, class, economic status from us, we love to give them names in order to derogate them, especially when their back is turned. And the Bible says that if you even call somebody an idiot, you're in danger of the judgment, which is specifically talking about civil judgment, and that if you get angry at somebody, you're at risk of the fires of hell, which should cause us to pause, because it's very easy to give libtard or conservatard or trumpets, or like, there's so many of them out there. It's so easy to give a euphemistic name to those around us, because as soon as you do that, you don't have to treat them as a human being with emotions, backstory anymore. You give yourself a license to start treating them as inferior, as less than. The Bible gives no room for that. The Christian life gives no room for that. It's one of those signposts that shows if you're moving down that direction, calling people weebs, calling people nerds, calling people whatever, because of the desire to exclude those people from your circle, from your sphere of influence, from your echo chamber, it's a signpost to say, maybe you're not as spiritual as you think you are. Maybe you're not really as much of a strong Christian as you think you are. So, all of that, the highest standard, getting back to the very beginning, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, let no unwholesome talk proceed out of your mouth, except that which will build up. If we sealed our lips, tied our fingers so that we weren't allowed to, we literally cut it off at the pass, refused to let any unwholesome words proceed out of our mouths, what would we be left with? Would we end up just silent all of the time? Would we not have anything to say to anyone about anything anymore? That would be another one of those signposts to say, you know what, we need to grow. We need to do some work in this area. Not just about the words we're saying. You don't have to tie a rubber band around your wrist. But what's in your heart that's squirting out in this way, that's being pressed out in this particular way that needs to be uprooted? And I think something else that must be addressed here is it includes you. When you talk about, think about your internal monologue regarding yourself, you're made in the image of God just as much as anyone else is. Is it derogatory? Is it violent? Is it are you really your own worst enemy with your own words? Do you constantly cut yourself down? Oh, I'm such an idiot. Which, it's me. I do this a lot. I'm an idiot. I'm a fool. I should have known better. Do you do this to yourself? If we're supposed to love others the way that we love ourselves, maybe one of the problems in our society with loving each other, maybe the deficit there is that we don't have very good love for ourselves to begin with. We don't have an overflow of love to offer others, which is overflowing from ourselves. We don't have a healthy view of ourselves, which this is no self-esteem sermon either. It's not. I'm more than aware of that we do have a narcissistic obsession with ourselves. That's why the camera faces towards you on your phones, right? So that you can take as many selfies as you want. But is that just a sort of overcompensation for the lack of love that we have for ourselves? Something to think about.